Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us from wherever you are. I'm Professor Billy Riggs, Professor of Management at the University of San Francisco, and this is Innovate for Good 2021, our fifth annual conference, celebrating social innovation and truly businesses and CEOs that are practicing and the practice and walking the walk of doing good while innovating in their own discipline. I could not be more excited to host some dynamic speakers in the space of logistics and delivery, as well as media and information. And these are specifically topics that have impacted all of us over the past year. But before we do that, I want to just welcome Dean Charles Moses, who would like to provide a welcome to us on this very important and special day.
Welcome to the University of San Francisco's fifth annual Innovate for Good conference. I'm Charles Moses, Dean of the School of Management at the University of San Francisco. Today, I'm honored to bring together inspirational business and government leaders at the forefront of social impact to discuss various topics around social entrepreneurship, cross-sector partnerships, city building, and business. It has been a challenging year, but as you will see today, leaders and executives have continued to grow and innovate in the face of global crisis. Today's event is sponsored by the Harari Initiative, which honors the work of former USF professor, Dr. Oren Harari, by continuing his mission to bridge theory and practice in the fields of conscious leadership and social innovation. Professor Billy Riggs, the host of this event, continues to build on Dr. Harari's spirit and has assembled an amazing lineup of inspiring speakers. Thank you to our students, alumni, faculty, and staff, and friends in helping to drive these important conversations and for continuing to innovate in San Francisco and around the globe. I hope that each of you will be inspired to continue to change the world for good from wherever you are. And now we will hear from our host, Professor Billy Riggs.
Thank you, Charles. I really appreciate it. And before we get started and hear from our two amazing panels, we have a really important thing that we're going to do. Each year as a part of this event, we choose to honor an executive who is leading with integrity and authenticity and building an influential career in the field of social innovation. And we do so through an award called the Harari Award. And as Dean Moses just referenced, this event really pays homage to Oren Harari, who passed away in 2010, and two of his friends, Alan Davis and Mary Lou Dare, endowed this program and sponsored this award in an effort to honor Dr. Harari's work that bridges leadership in conscious efforts as well as social innovation. And so today we really have the honor of having Andrew Peterson from the city of Oakland as our awardee. And I couldn't be more proud to also bring to the table Dr. Shivani Shukla, who's actually worked with Andrew on a number of projects. And she will just provide a brief bio of Andrew and his amazing commitment to conscious leadership and social innovation.
Thank you, Dr. Riggs. Like he said, I'm very excited to be presenting Mr. Andrew Peterson. He's an application platform and enterprise software veteran with more than 30 years in the IT industry. He has built a successful career leading experienced software development teams and running SaaS data center operations. He has extensive experience leading teams of IT professionals in engineering, network operations, customer support, and service delivery. In March 2017, he was appointed by Mayor Libby Schaaf to take the helm of the city's IT operations as the new CIO for the city of Oakland. As the CIO, Mr. Peterson directs about 80 staff members engaged in enterprise services, IaaS, app development, database admin, networking, and telecom. Under his leadership, the city has received the CIO 100 Award for its Oak Apps portal, a collection of web-based applications designed to easily connect residents with Oakland City services. With an OCAPS account, users can sign into multiple applications, which eliminates the need to provide duplicate information for city services. So the single sign-on system includes apps such as Rent Adjustment Program that helps residents report and combat rent rates that are raised unfairly. Police Review Agency app that replaces paper-based processes for filing complaints against law officers, and several other such services on the portal. The city now communicates with its residents digitally and more effectively. Mr. Peterson is credited for this and many such technology-enabled community-oriented solutions designed to support digital inclusions for the underserved population of the city and beyond. He has an MBA from USF, yay, and a BS in computer science from Purdue. He has collaborated with a team of analytics and IS professors and a public admin professor at USF to conduct deep dives into the homeless population of the city, along with a large grant for the team to conduct to become data partners for the city's transformative climate communities project, aimed at the development of transportation, environmental, housing, and social infrastructure. He is a committed Oakland resident, and I'd like to now pass it over to Mr. Peterson for him to say a few words.
Hi. When I was first informed I would be receiving this award, I immediately questioned my worthiness, so much so that I compiled a list of some projects I thought might qualify me. Even Professor Riggs had to remind me of projects that USF and Oakland had collaborated on around homelessness and other things, and also other projects that we are about to begin. These issues of social justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, equality, and et cetera, are so monumental that in our efforts to right or correct them seem so inadequate. I realize that individual efforts are simply scratching the surface, but I do take solace in that our collective efforts are slowly starting to make a dent in this issue, in these problems. I want to thank USF for finding me worthy of this most prestigious award. I am so humbled and honored. I've received several awards in my career. However, this Harari Award is by far the most meaningful and satisfying, as it means that I've tried to help those less fortunate than myself, that I have tried to use the blessings God has bestowed upon me to try and help someone else. So again, thank you so much for this great honor.
Thanks so much, Pete. And we are so proud to have you as an alumni, to be an ambassador for this event, but also an ambassador for our program, but also I think just to illustrate and to have a partner who's with us in the trenches. And as you know, part of the mission and part of the Jesuit mission of USF is to protect the most vulnerable. And I think we see that in your work. And so we are so grateful to have you as an alumni, but also a fellow champion of these mission-based values. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that was super inspiring for me. We are actually going to expand on those discussions. And if you didn't hear, the kind of the intent of this event is to really celebrate social and conscious leadership, investing in issues related to people in the planet while we're innovating business, both and public sector organizations. And so we're going to take a little break here. And if you can imagine on a virtual stage, Shivani and Pete and I are going to run off and jump into another panel. So we're going to welcome to stage Mr. AJ Vermani, Miss Megan Miller, and Sven Wolf, three dynamic leaders who are continuing to responsibly lead organizations in the logistics sector. Just hang out. We'll be back in 1 minute and welcome them to our stage. All right. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a chance to get up and stretch their legs. It is an important thing that we need to remember in an era of on-screenness that we've entered into over the last year. But one of the things that really inspired this first panel is the way we've lived over the last years and how we've been served by the logistics and delivery sector. And so I'm welcoming now three amazing individuals. First, Megan Miller from ease.com, who's the Chief Operating Officer there. Thanks for being here, Megan. We also have AJ Vermani, CEO, esteemed CEO of Cargojet, and has had a long career both in the he was originally in, I think, even the commercial airline section, and then actually ended up managing freight. So we'll give him a chance to talk a little more about that. So two interesting windows into goods delivery, and then Sven Wolf, who actually has been pivoting between goods and people. We're going to pronounce it now, Sven. It's a very, very Swedish company name. Sven and I have this joke: is it Boots or is it Boots? Or so we can maybe ideate on that a little more. But CEO of Boots, headquartered in Sweden. So a very multinational and multidisciplinary group that has really, I think, innovated their business models over the last year when we've dealt with some systematic challenges. So welcome, the three of you. Could not be more happy to have you here. Maybe just let me kick it off by maybe starting with you, Megan, just for a quick introduction of who you are, your company, and anything else you'd like us to know as we get started.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. As you said, I'm Megan Miller. I am currently the Chief Operating Officer at Ease. Ease is the largest cannabis delivery marketplace in the state of California. So we are growing quickly and look to be expanding out of California very quickly. So excited to be here and to talk about what we do.
Thank you, Megan. Maybe AJ, if you want to, I would just love to hear a little about your background as well, and evolution as a professional, and anything else you'd like to tell us about yourself as well.
Yeah, thank you, Billy and Charles, for having me on this program. I'm excited, and I'm AJ Vermani. I'm the CEO of Cargojet Airways. We are headquartered in Canada, in Ontario, but we fly all over the world. So we started. I've been in the freight forwarding for the last 40 odd years. Logistics, freight, custom brokerage, warehousing, that kind of stuff. In '99, I sold off my companies to an American company, getting out of the freight business. And once it gets in your blood, it never comes out. So I went back into it from a different angle this time, from the other side of the desk, rather than buying services from an airline. I thought I'll become an airline myself. And this was right after, just before 9/11, actually. So in July, I invested in a company called Canada 3000 Airlines, which was predominantly a holiday type of airline, but then they get into the scheduled stuff. And I invested some money with them, and I bought their cargo division. So they would own the passengers, I would own the bottom for the cargo. It was a great model. But in September, after 9/11, the passenger business crashed. So I was partners with a bankrupt company. So what do? I write off and go play some golf, or do I go back? So I decided to double down and buy the company out of bankruptcy, but never started the passenger side of the business because I just love boxes and cargo. So it wasn't sexy in those days, but now it is. And we started with one aircraft, and after 9/11, people thought that was the wrong time to get into the business. But here we are today. I think by the end of this year, we're going to have 35 wide-body cargo aircraft, the largest airline cargo in Canada, and working around the globe. So we'll talk some more about it, but it's been a great experience, especially timing is everything, and the timing was bad when we got into it. But right now, it's a great timing to be in cargo business.
Thanks, AJ. And tidbit about AJ is he actually went to school with our dean, which is actually a nice little story.
Yes, I was very fortunate. Charles Moses and I, we used to do our homework together. I won't tell you all the stories about Charles, but we went for our MBA together in New York, and I used to fly every week to New York City from Toronto on that $19 one-way flight to attend 2 or 3 days of school and do some homework. So it was a great experience, and to be honest with you, certainly changed my life and the way I think. So it was well worth it, I should say.
That's great.
So.
That's great. Well, maybe last but not least, we're going alphabetical here. So Sven Wolf with Boost.
Hi, please. Excellent to be participating in this esteemed panel, and really good to see you again, Billy. Yeah, so as you mentioned, our kind of weird company name, we used to joke about that. It's not that important exactly how you pronounce it, as long as you pronounce it with a lot of conviction. So because conviction is really what is needed to achieve our mission, which is really to kick fossil cars out of the city centers. That's what's going to be our contribution to this small planet that we're on together. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of this company, Boost. As you mentioned, based in Sweden. We have our proof of concept site in our capital, Stockholm, where we use small electric vehicles. We call them pods. And initially we use them to transport individuals, people transport. And we also have this digital advertising sign on top of these vehicles. So we have a revenue stream on from digital advertising as well. But we were very badly affected by this pandemic. So our company went into what you call a reconstruction, I think, in English, and we've struggled very hard to survive and pivot our business model, and I think we're going to be talking a little bit more about that eventually here. But also we fell in love with boxes, just like you, AJ, and that made it possible for us to leave this reconstruction, and now we're back in business again and growing very quickly instead. So that's really what we're doing, and I'm very looking forward to this discussion on this panel today.
Yes, and it'd be important to emphasize for the audience too, is if you want to Google the Boost platform, it's a really interesting platform. Sven and I have known each other for 2 or 3 years, and it's really hard to conceptualize other than to call it a tuk-tuk, which is a micro taxi or a mini pod, but basically a micro electric tuk-tuk. And it reminds me of a lot of the natural gas vehicles you see in Delhi and in some places in India. But Google it, and actually if you Google Boost and Pokemon, there is a Pokemon version. So my kids are very aware; they want to ride in that one. But it illustrates the potential that Sven and his team had explored in terms of marketing and wrapping some of the vehicles with when Pokemon Detective Pikachu, I think, came out, and I believe you did a partnership with Oatly as well. But
yeah.
Maybe it's since we've heard a little bit kind of about this kind of idea of rethinking and being obsessed with boxes, I'm interested in the cute bags right now. So, maybe we start off with a little more in-depth question with Megan, just in terms of, what are the last couple years looked like, and are there opportunities and challenges that Ease has dealt with, particularly, and we don't have to focus on a global pandemic, but it'd be interesting to see how are you adapting? Are things you're doing? Are there opportunities you see? What do you think?
Yeah, the pandemic has been very interesting for us. We were lucky enough to be cannabis was deemed an essential business during the pandemic. So we were immediately challenged with finding ways to operate safely. So obviously we have a network of local dispensaries and drivers that do deliveries to homes. And so we needed to find ways to make sure that we could continue providing our service during the pandemic, as it was deemed an essential business, but making sure that we were taking every single precaution possible to keep everyone safe, both our employees and our customers. So it's definitely one of the craziest experiences in my career, of having to sort of overnight invest in large quantities of PPE, find different ways to source that. We changed a number of our internal processes to make sure that we had safe operating environments at the dispensaries, and then kind of things that you wouldn't necessarily think of in cannabis. We can't do touchless delivery because we cannot take the risk of delivering to children. So every delivery has to be made face to face. So we worked to lobby local regulators to allow us, typically we require a signature from a customer on a phone. So, kind of that's not a great process during a pandemic. So we lobbied local legislation to allow our drivers to just sign with an X. So, the customer didn't have to sign. That's a temporary fix, and we will go back to hopefully at some point in the near future, we will go back to customers actually signing. But so for us, it was really about, during this time, how do we find ways to operate safely? And it was incredibly challenging. We definitely, had faced some situations where we had to shut down some of our dispensaries once we had a COVID breakout. So, we implemented testing processes, and, we've been able, for the most part, to maintain our prior service levels. So I'm incredibly proud of the work that the company has done, but I would be lying if I didn't say it was a very heavy lift.
Well, I didn't know the essential service piece. That's actually, it's fascinating and very bold for California to take that approach, given some of the data we see coming out on medicinal as well as social cannabis. So, maybe just one follow-up is, I'm curious, so does Ease own its own dispensaries, or does it operate as a broker or actual logistics company?
Yeah, so it's actually a mix. We own some of our dispensaries, and with other dispensaries, we partner with the owners to run the operations ourselves. So it is a mix of both. And that's actually new for us. We started out as just a technology company, but in early 2020 decided to make the pivot to verticalization to actually be a plant touching organization. So, we were about 2 months into that when the pandemic hit. So it was a crazy time.
Wow, I'm learning. That's great. I want to jump to AJ just because you hit on something, and Sven, I definitely want to hear too, kind of, because I think you and Megan, your companies operate in this last mile or last segment. Maybe we can even say last 20 to 50 miles in the case of Megan, because I think that when you think about the dispensary location, it actually may be further than what you're talking about with city centers, Sven. But AJ, when we think about, and Megan is thinking like instantly, I had to have PPE. How's your business grapple with? I'm assuming that a lot of this PPE has to go long haul. Like these aren't being produced in California, and so have there been things that you've had to grapple with, AJ, that you were unanticipated, and how did you handle those? and were they actually the product, or were they organizational and management issues in terms of scaling? I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And I think you're muted right now.
So, Billy, yes, March 13, 2020 was a date that everything came crashing. And that was when I was on March 5th, actually, I was in New York City. They only had 100 cases. We were very cautious in a restaurant we met, had our sanitizers out even at that time, and nobody thought in 1 week, everything is going to shut down in a big way. We certainly had to, the PPE was a big situation everywhere. Like you could not find a mask, you could not find any sanitizers, you could not find any wipes, and nobody knew about, what precautions to take and, what this virus is all about. So March 13th, we had a weekend conference call with all the employees. We have about 1,000 employees in Canada and US. And the biggest issue was, how do we keep everybody safe? Number one, how do we bring in PPE for the country and the hospitals that were, I had a local hospital who called me. They said only 100 masks are left, and that's like 4 days of surgeries, and we don't have any N95 masks. So, our pilots, our maintenance people, our ground handling staff, everybody kind of, we had a big call. It spent about 2 to 3 hours. We had some medical advisors from Cleveland Clinic on the call, what to do, what not to do, and we immediately were summoned in, being the national airline in Canada for cargo, requested by the government for almost like a daily flight into China to get PPE. Unfortunately, the relationship between the two countries is not that great. And we were the last one to get permits. It took us about a week and a lot of pushing through diplomatic channels to get permits. We set up a base. Our pilots for the first week would fly directly from Vancouver into Shanghai. Unfortunately, the rules in Shanghai were very different. You had to go get a test, and then they locked you up for 15 hours in a hotel room, and with no keys, with just a little window that you will get a food in. Literally, you were in a 15-hour jail. After 15 hours, they'll open the door, and they'll either take you through a green bar on the floor or the red bar. And the red bar took you to isolation if you were testing positive. And the green bar, you get to go to your plane and get your load and get out of the country. So after about a week, we set up bases in Japan, so we could exchange crews there, and so the people didn't have to stay in Shanghai. So it was we were almost like in a war. The atmosphere was, we have to fight this out. We could not find any PPE for the staff. My house turned into a pretty well warehouse. I had people from all walks of life buying PPE. Although we are bringing in millions of masks by them, they were not ours. They were for the government and the hospitals. But we bought our own product. Later down the road, we were able to bring our own from China. We sourced them, and when there was space left on the flight, we would put it on. But first 3 months, we were buying at any price we could get, whether it was sanitizers, whether it was my whole garage, my whole front of the house was turned into a big warehouse supply. 24/7, there were people there supplying to, all the branches. And our biggest task was keeping our people healthy. We were not rationing anything. We would take a box of masks and sanitizer. If you want one sanitizer, you can take 3. Take one for your car, take one for your family. Because if your family's healthy, you're going to be healthy. So we spent, I think in the first 3 months, we spent over $5 million on PPE, which was a major expense for us. So it was a challenge. It was almost being in a war. You have to step up, which we did. We were bringing in, every week, we were bringing in about 7 flights, so about 1 million pounds of PPE from China, and gloves from some other countries like Turkey and all that stuff. It was an exercise that I will never forget in my life. It changed our lives forever. But the bottom line is the policies we adapted of free flowing of PPE to the staff, their families, have our own in-house testing nurse. We kept it safe, and I must say that I don't want to jinx it, but we never had an outbreak more than 1 or 2 people at a time. We kept everybody safe and never left a parcel behind. Especially, not only we had the PPE pressure, but we also had the pressure of e-commerce deliveries. And the e-commerce deliveries, just to give you an example, I mean, in Canada, the sales, the e-commerce sales compared to total retail was only 7 or 8%, which was about half of what it was in US. I think US was running about 15% prior to pandemic. So almost 100% of the sales now were all e-commerce. So you can imagine how much pressure we had, not only for people who were buying goods on just now all the goods were becoming more like necessities, like toothpaste, or toothbrushes and toilet paper. And if you could find some, everything was being shipped because people were not getting out of the house as the lockdown was pretty strict. So we went from like about 12 to 14 million pounds a week into 30 million pound territory in a week of moving product from Mexico, US, into the US. So, it was some hotspots in Germany, Cologne, we had flights to. So balancing all that stuff. And then we also have a big division that handles, seafood, for example, out of Halifax and Boston. We ship a lot of seafoods and that supply had to continue on. So, with perishables, daily needs, and PPE, we just managed. We managed it effectively. Everybody took it seriously, followed all the precautions, and we came out on the other end looking pretty good financially, and also fulfilling our social responsibility as well at the same time.
Thanks, AJ. That's an amazing story, and I think too, it's while I didn't want to make today about a COVID, maybe it can be a COVID catharsis, because I do think what the story you're telling in terms of looking in arrears really is one of growth and conquering this global pandemic. And so I think that's acknowledge that, but also acknowledging that it did change our lives, and whether or not it'll be for the next 100 years, we don't know. I imagine it's probably we will continue to see an evolution. But I think it's acknowledge and just to acknowledge where we're going with the next panel is, man, I watched a lot of TV last year.
Yeah.
So, so we will talk a little bit about news and information too. So, AJ, you want to chime in? Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the challenges we faced was that 50% of the cargo worldwide moves on passengers' flights in their bellies. And with no passenger flights, everybody was looking for a plane. We had 30 planes operational, and if I had another 30, they would still be full. So there was additional pressure because there was no lift for cargo on passenger flights domestically or internationally. And, we had to pick up the slack as well. So a plane that normally flies 12 hours a day was flying almost like 20 hours a day and very little time for maintenance. So, it's much better now, but certainly the past 8 months has been an experience that I think shows us that we can get ready in a hurry and face any challenges if we put our minds together, and if everybody wants to succeed, there's no obstacles.
Yeah. So Sven, what do you think? It sounds like there needs to be some, from Megan's example and AJ, some vertical alignment opportunity. Going from owning their dispensary to making PPE. But maybe you could just provide us with you've got an interesting story because you also dealt with some challenges, and now even as of today are announcing that you're coming out of this. I think you've changed your model a little bit. Maybe just talk to us about your evolution over the last couple of years.
Indeed, sure. No, I'd be happy to. So first of all, very inspiring to hear how you took on these challenges, AJ. So in Stockholm, where we're operational at the moment, we had in the month of March, during a 2-week period, we could see our transport revenues from people transport being reduced to only 20%. And our advertising revenues, they went down to 0. So of course this was very dramatic for us, and just like you mentioned before, it happened very, very quickly. So I had 3 board meetings in 3 days, and we were very close in shutting the company down. We did not see any quick fix, but then actually we heard someone knocking on the door.
But sure, you also had a drop in ridership, and you had no marketing at the same time, right? So I don't know if you mentioned that, but the marketing revenue also just went away.
Exactly, both those revenue streams was slashed down to approximately 20% on a monthly basis. So so we although we sanitized all of the vehicles and so on, the fact was that people were sitting at home. So what we did was that we heard someone knocking on the door, and it was restaurants primarily asking us to help them with home delivery of the meals. So we applied for this company reconstruction. We were approved, and then we just with full force changed this the business model to allow for home delivery and instant delivery of both meals as well as e-commerce packages, and that's been a very successful change of strategy. So it was really tough also for us. It's quite a different business, but we can see some really interesting synergies between people transport and the transport of parcels and food in the city centers. So that's really where we're putting our effort now, to optimize these flows within the city centers, and we can see some really nice benefits coming out of that, also from a society point of view.
Maybe let's stay on that topic, and this is open to any of you, but looking at societal benefits, and I think I mentioned environmental benefit, but I think most of you could easily answer or come up with some fake answer that you'd give me about how you're addressing climate change and reducing emissions. Let's skip over that and let's talk about a more thorny issue. Let's talk about people, because all of you have people working for you, and Megan, as you know, in California, labor in the gig economy has been a big deal over the last year, and so I'd love to hear from all 3 of you just kind of how you're dealing with, and we heard a little bit from you, AJ, about how you're caring for your people, particularly, but in the delivery economy, gig economy, last mile, it's a little different. And so we'd love to hear a little bit. And Megan, Sven, whoever wants to go first. I know, Sven, you've had to really change your model in terms of moving from one model of labor to another. So would love to hear a little bit about kind of this issue of how do you preserve your talent pool? How do you, but also get your labor, and how do you value human dignity right now when the economy is really changing, right? Like the idea of this delivery job is much different than it was 10 years ago. So Megan, Sven, I don't know who wants to jump in first. We can be a little organic.
Sure, I'll jump in, Sven. Yeah, sure. So I think that's a really interesting question. For us, I think what we've done is just we've leaned in incredibly hard in terms of the things that really make Ease a great place to work. And one of the things I'm most proud of, really, along those dimensions, is our social justice programs. So, there are multiple initiatives that make up our social justice program. First and foremost, we created a social equity menu on our platform such that we can highlight social equity licensees, and we give them, favorable terms and spotlight them on the menu, which is great. Another program that we started is the
Sorry, Megan, can you explain that a little more? And I'd love to hear a little more about like what that actually looks like. Is that like when the driver or the deliverer sees it on their dashboard, they get a different rate? I just want to understand that a little more.
So yeah, it's actually social equity licensees who create products, so who have flour or edibles. We have created a separate place on the menu to highlight social equity products specifically. So not pertaining to the drivers necessarily, but brands that have received social equity licenses, to make sure that we are highlighting them on the menu. And then, as I was going to say, another part of the program is the Momentum Business Accelerator. So we have found, this is the second year, we have granted $50,000 to about 10 different social equity licensees in the cannabis space. And it's basically a 12-week business development program that we put them through. So, we grant $50,000 and then we put them through a 12-week course that is, focused on things like marketing and branding, things like compliance and legal, public relations, investor relations. How do you give an investor pitch? So we do a 12-week course. And at the end of the course, each of the participants, actually, we hold a pitch day and they pitch their business to a field of investors. And we've had several from the first class last year actually graduate and become members of the social equity menu on our website. So really leaning in, as you talk about, kind of the war on drugs really had a disproportionate impact on people of color. And so, it's something that we are incredibly proud of to, focus on, building a sustainable industry for everyone that wants to be involved.
Megan, I really appreciate it. Thanks for letting me interject. And I want to acknowledge, like you just hit on a very strong trope that is cultural trope, that the drugs, crime thing. And we just want to acknowledge that here, because I think that it has targeted vulnerable populations in a way that it's fascinating to see your company taking on. And I appreciate you bringing that up. And so I just want to bring it up a little more literal sense in terms that we acknowledge these cultural biases, particularly in the U.S. Maybe Sven, I don't know if you want to talk about your approach. I know you've had this evolution in terms of specifically how your employees and Megan, I'm glad you didn't say anything you didn't have to, but in terms of whether or not they actually are employees or contractors, and that's a big deal in California. We won't get into that here. I can nerd out with anybody on the line later about kind of the legalities and such like that, as I'm sure can Megan, but she's not going to do that publicly. So, Sven.
Yes. No. Yeah. That was one of the most dramatic things that we went through, because I don't know, maybe you've picked up that Sweden is a slightly socialist country. Maybe you've heard that somewhere. And that means that having an agreement with the union that's the standard approach to do things. And of course, the gig economy is quite controversial here as well. So what we were forced to try to find our own way, some kind of middle ground, because what we found was that after 3 years with a union agreement, when the pandemic struck, it went from difficult to impossible. So we had to grow into a different model where we actually reimbursement or the payment for our couriers is dependent on actually the performance. So, and in fact, although we changed the model, we're still the same people. We're still the same hearts in our chests. So we're building this other model based on performance based remuneration, but with a very responsible and a decent approach to that. And that is really necessary, because what we're finding is that there's really tough competition to attract the best couriers in Stockholm. So it's not a black or white scenario. It's really more nuanced than that.
Yeah, and this is going to be an issue that I think we will continue to circle back to, even as we've seen with some of the new laws in California, which has really led on some of these new gig labor laws. There's been some corner cases in terms of, for example, how our stimulus actually goes down to people that actually fall under these laws. Some of them don't qualify, for example, for local stimulus checks or local minimum wage thresholds. So definitely lots of things to pay attention to there. I want to ask, AJ, particularly since he's managing people in a different context, if there are things that he's had to do with his people. And then AJ, I have another question for you too, in terms of I feel like particularly you have a window into this thorny issue of jet fuel, and if we have this two-pronged challenge of protecting people, protecting the planet, how do we deal with the climate emissions of jet fuel?
So let me touch on the people side very quickly, because that's been a big challenge in many ways. In the airline business, prior to pandemic, there was a pilot shortage. There were no pilots available. The business was so booming that cargo airlines had very difficult time recruiting pilots and maintenance people, because everybody wants to work for a passenger carrier. It's a little nicer than flying boxes. But some people who want to fly cargo, most of the jobs are night flying, and people, it's unattractive. What's happened now is that with all the airlines not flying passengers, cargo has become very attractive. People have realized that it is the most stable place. People will always need goods. And so now there is not a shortage. I would say people are being called back, but I think there is that market has eased up, which has helped our deliveries a lot. The second part of during the pandemic was that the general ground handlers who kind of load the planes and offload, and there's about 700-800 of them we have across the country. What we found challenging was that although they are regular employees, we were trying to get, we got a lot of people from part-timers and help out from all walks of life. But we found a very interesting that we were competing with our government to get these employees working, because in Canada, everybody was getting $2,000 a month if you were not able to work or unemployed or whatever. So when people are getting $2,000 a month for not doing anything, why would they come to work at let's say $25 an hour job? And why would they risk themselves? So what we had to do was to make sure that we pay better than what the government was giving them. So everybody in our company ended up with a $75 a day hero pay, and besides all the PPE they would get. So, and these $75 we made it tax-free, so we will take the burden off it. And so this was a big incentive that people showed up to work, and our operations continue to go on as usual. Because if we did not offer that, we would be competing with that government stimulus that they were getting for $2,000 a month. But I think many big companies, grocery chains, were paying like $16 or $20 a day, $2 an hour increase, where we went overboard Again, it cost us money, but to be honest with you, the gains were so substantial that we had to keep the employees healthy. We had to keep them safe. And the company did well during pandemic. And we said, okay, that's one way of recognizing the people and also sharing some of the rewards with them. So it kind of worked both ways. And I think that has brought on a lot of loyalty and attendance, and we've been able to do the job. So that's on the people side. We had a little bit of comments to make. I did. You talk about the jet fuel and the environment. So I think the last probably 1 year with very few flights happening, and any flights that are mostly happening have been cargo flights. The normal schedule has been 20 or 30%. So, it's a great win for that. If nothing else, the positive side of all this is the environment's probably a lot more cleaned up with this lack of flying. But on the cargo side, the flights have increased a lot, right? So as I mentioned, we were handling almost double the loads. So we're probably doing double the flying. So it's still not as bad as it used to be. But that's one of the things that, there's no choice. In today's world trade, getting the product one place to another, people buying online, there is going to be a lot more fuel spent in the skies. As you know, Amazon's building a big airline, Amazon Air, UPS, FedEx, DHL, Cargojet. These guys have Atlas Air. I mean, you look at the number of cargo planes that are available today, there are none. So a plane that was worth $25 million is now $35 million. So there's a shortage of cargo planes because of the goods. So it's a very difficult task to be, although I'm not saying it's not important, and please don't take me wrong, but right now at the need of the hour, there is no such thing as nobody's thinking about the fuel burn and carbon footprint or cleaning up the environment when essential goods and supplies are needed everywhere. I think there will be, once this pandemic is over, there will be a conversation on it. But right now, I don't think anybody's even thinking about getting into the environmental issue when it comes to flying planes. So,
yeah, some unique challenges there for sure. We've got about 5 more minutes or so, and I'm going to do something I don't normally do, taking some risks here. Personally, I just want to ask Megan a question. We have a question from the audience about just kind of if you could share, what percent of sales the social equity program is driving. But, as you're answering that, for all three of you, I think it'd be really interesting to see if you have any questions for each other. And I've actually never done this before, huge experiment. But feel free. I mean, if you've got a question for one shot, this is a really interesting discussion. So maybe Megan first, and if anybody else wants to chime in, if you got a question for one of the other panelists, I'd be delighted to entertain that.
Yeah, in terms of our social equity menu, I'm not trying to speak to the absolute percentage, but since we launched the menu in 2019, we have sold over $6.2 million worth of product from our social equity licensees. So it's exciting. It's money directly into their pockets. So we're quite proud of that.
That's great. And I just thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you sharing that. Any questions have we jogged any questions for each other? Definitely, and I can definitely see some potential questions you might want to ask each other offline. But maybe let's just leave it at this. I think one thing that's really interesting about sitting in an academic role and being a professor who gets to host these kinds of events and moderate super smart individuals is that I get to learn, but I also get to facilitate the learning of others. And I think maybe as we bring kind of this session to a close, one of the things that would be helpful for me to hear from each of you would be, typically what you have done to kind of what conscious leadership in general means to you, and if you have any lessons for the future leaders and managers in your industry or others? And I know, Megan, you've worked across many different sectors. Sven, as have you, and AJ, you've been in one sector for a long, long time. Are there lessons that you might share with our students as well as our alumni that could help them in their own journeys?
All right, we'll let Megan go first.
Sure. Gosh, I think a couple lessons jump to mind. I feel like I have been successful because I look at the data. So I just try and encourage us always to be making data-based decisions. And, not that there's not room for instinct and what your gut is saying, because that's definitely also important, but, really leveraging data to drive the decision-making in your organization is something that, I started my career out of business school at Amazon, and that was something that I learned there, and it has served me very well throughout my career. In terms of, I think, just kind of another piece of advice, also, something I learned at Amazon. I'm now a COO and a mom, and I've got kids at home during the pandemic. It's been a crazy year, and being at home, there's not a lot of there's not a dividing line anymore between sort of work and personal life. And so, something that I really am encouraging, my team to really spend their time thinking about is that, no one will draw your boundaries for you, and no one will respect boundaries that you don't respect. So that is definitely something that I, think is important, to women, but also just to the general population, especially now that we're so many of us are working remotely, is that you have to own your boundaries, and you have to draw them. You have to own your own mental health. You can't expect anyone else to do it for you. So that's definitely something that I continue to learn over and over again, I would say.
AJ, you put her on the spot, so you got to go next.
Well, absolutely. And for me, the recipe or the secret recipe has been a very a word that's used so much, but a lot of people don't mean it. And it's about people. And I think at the end of the day, I don't consider we are in logistics business, or we are in in grocery business, or any business you take it. It all boils down to people at the end of the day. And what it showed me during these tough times is that if people didn't step up, we wouldn't have fulfilled our obligations, and we wouldn't have been successful. And why? One of the reasons people were stepped up, because this was not just during pandemic. And if people are treated well, people are treated with respect, if there is a team atmosphere in your organization, you will get rewards. I mean, at this time of the day, at this time of the life, when you look at the pandemic situation, if you did not have that team spirit, if you did not have people with their positivity, and this culture, if people who didn't have that culture probably are not going to survive, because at the end of the day, a happy worker is a productive worker. And if a happy worker is also a happy family member at home. And when a member is happy at home, he's going to bring that to work. So it all boils down to, we have 5 principles in the organization that we started the company with. One is respect, fairness, teamwork, diversity. So, when you look at equality, so these are the 5 principles we had. And it boils down to one thing at the end of the day, that you got to treat people as you would like to be treated, and as human beings, and understand their needs, listen to them. Their small problems could be big for them, might be small for you, but for them it's big. And if you're not listening, and if don't have that people culture, you would not be successful with or without pandemic. And I think that's been the key to my whole thinking and organization. And I am what I am because of my team. So that's how I feel.
That's very nice. Sven, okay, last word. We're standing in between you and your dinner probably because you're in Gothenburg.
Or a bottle of wine.
Touche.
Well, I'll keep it short and sweet then. I think to me, the key is really critical thinking. So in my mind, like if you question continuously what you do and the messages that you receive, the information you get, the data that you mentioned, Megan, and you do that, question that in a constructive and healthy way, you'll eventually find your way towards a more conscious and sustainable leadership and approach. I think that is really the key to many of these principles also that you mentioned, AJ. Keep your mind on its toes and think critically, and the rest will just follow on as a positive effect down the track, I think.
That's awesome. And that very clearly reflects what a mentor of mine used to say, which is question the status quo, but always be a student and always stay humble. So I wanted to just thank you three for being here. We're going to let you go and either enjoy your dinner, enjoy your evening, or finish your workday. But again, thanks for such a rich discussion. Really appreciate having you here. Everyone else, we're going to follow Megan's advice and we're going to take care of ourselves. I'm going to ask you to just take a quick 2-minute stretch break before we come back for a really amazing panel with David Gehring, Marcy Harris, and Chris Wexler.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Well, welcome back. Hope you had a good stretch break. Really just continuing this rich discussion here, Innovate for Good 2021. And want to welcome to our virtual stage here, Dave Gehring from Distributed Media Lab. And Dave will tell you a little bit about a rich history in both, started in news and has come to tech, and now he's a serial entrepreneur. I also want to introduce Marcy Harris, CEO of Popbox. And Marcy balances this train between media, information, and governance, and really has a rich background in that space. I also have a JD, I believe. So we should tell us a little bit about her background as well. And then lastly, get a now serial entrepreneur as well, Chris Wexler, who is CEO, I believe, a brand new company, right? You bounced to a couple companies, and now you're at a company called Kunam. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. But as a probably 20-year history in the advertising industry, so interesting. It'll be interesting to hear you and Gehring get into it on the advertising side. And of course, there's a whole information media side with regard to politics there that I think would be interesting to hear about from Marcy as well. So without further ado, maybe I'll start in the inverse order. And Chris, what you want to just provide a little bit of a broader introduction of you, but as well as your company and what Kunam is.
Sure. Yeah, I'm the CEO of Krunam, KRUNAM, just so you understand the spelling. It is a technology company that is focused on fighting the spread and distribution of child sexual abuse materials, what is parochially called child porn. We don't say that because that implies consent. And so it's using the best in deep learning, AI, and computer vision to help large media platforms keep that kind of content off their platforms. And because that's where a large amount of the distribution is happening right now. In fact, last year alone, there was about 70 million incidents of CSAM detected on these platforms. And right now it's being, sadly, A, it's there, and B, the humans are the ones that have to actually weed through everything and find it. And so not only is it damaging to the survivors of the abuse, but to the actual content moderators. And so using technology for what it does best, which is emotionally draining, repetitive work. And so we're excited to do that. My background is really unique. I was a Wall Street analyst for 5 years. I'd like to say I had the aptitude, but not the attitude. And then moved, produced theater for a little bit because, what do you do after Wall Street? And then I was lucky enough to get into marketing technology on the advertiser side at the beginning of the digital boom, post bubble pop, so about 2001. So I've been involved in early stage digital for 20 years, innovating in that space. And so constantly evolving and changing and keeping on top of trends. Very happy to have my advocation of better society hooked up with my vocation. So it's been a good move. I ran a small vegan power bar company for a while before COVID caused us to no longer be powering America. But now back to technology is a good spot for me. I'm really excited.
I need a vegan power bar right about now, but instead I will toss to Marcy, who kind of has a different, I think, lens on this whole thing. So Marcy.
You're really going to make me go after theater and vegan power bar Wall Street combination.
It's all right. Yeah, I'll be a straight-laced fool too.
Right. So yes, I'm Marcy Harris. I'm CEO and co-founder of Popbox. We work in a space that is not known for innovation, which is primarily with the U.S. Congress. It's a platform for civic engagement and for governing tools. And it's been really interesting to work with Congress over the past year during the pandemic, just because the institution itself was a bit slow to adapt, but also because it's a relationship arena. So to take so many things that normally happen in face-to-face meetings, and even just the kinds of things that get discussed walking by each other in a hallway online has been really interesting. So I'm kind of predisposed to jump at the chance to respond to a disaster. My background in public service came when my town got hit by a tornado. So I always say my first startup was a town. I was running the mayor's campaign at that time, and he put me in charge of the recovery. This was the town of Jackson, Tennessee, and I saw how much really comes out of people pulling together when status quo is not an option. So it was very natural for us at PopBox to kind of jump into the mode of helping Congress respond as the pandemic was kind of coming as we saw it coming. And then more recently, we've pulled together a lot of organizations to respond to what congressional staffers are continuing to go through in the wake of the January 6th attacks. So it's been quite a year for those who work in and around Congress and those who engage with them. So lots of innovation that wasn't necessarily by choice, but we're trying to help Congress think about how to take the lessons from this past year and incorporate it into a more, let's say, openness to change in the future.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And I maybe, Marcy, if we can come back to that, because I think too, we have two people that work on the media and the news side of that. And we've seen the connection between, mobilizing people for perhaps noxious or non-noxious use purposes over the last year. And so it would be interesting to see if we can come back to that topic. But before we, go further, Dave.
Yeah, no, I think like Marcy, I used to think my career path was somewhat circuitous in an interesting way until just now. I'm realizing I've had a really straight career path, like very clear narrative, very linear, apparently. But no, I've been focused on the economics of the news business for about the last 10 or 11 years. Started really focusing on the economics of the news business when I was doing a startup that was engaged with a lot of local news publishers, and in working with them, I was increasingly becoming aware of how bad their businesses are and how they're never going to get any better, and there was nothing they could do about it. And so the entire news media industry was devolving into a state of managing their decline. And that's just a really, really, really sad place to be. And then at the same time, I took my civics classes growing up, and I, understand that journalism is fundamental to providing us the information we need to be free and self-governing, and maintaining our democracy and all that. And so I thought, man, if we don't fix the economics of this industry, then we'll lose the capacity as a society to hold power accountable and maintain an informed population. And it'll be a 1 or 2 voting cycles before we've lost our democracy. And I used to say these things, and they seemed hyperbolic, back in the day. And then boom, the last 4 years, all of a sudden, I can't. There's nothing I can say that seems hyperbolic enough anymore. And I feel really bad for the screenwriters in Hollywood. Like, what in the world are they going to actually write that is, a crazy story about politics anymore? But so I focused on the economics of the news industry while at Google and YouTube, when a lot of my colleagues at Google and YouTube that were all kind of similarly well-intentioned and interested in trying to figure out how to save the news business in the web as a medium, they're more focused on how to tell the story in digital platforms. And I was much more interested in how to make money by telling the story on digital platforms. And I figured journalists will figure out how to tell the story in digital platforms if we have journalists employed to tell those stories. So I was just really only focused on the business models and the economics. And from an economic perspective, the goal was really, let's establish a new economic framework that supports quality original journalism on the medium of the web, so that my kids and my grandkids don't have to worry about the demise of that industry, and they don't have to worry about the demise of democracy as a consequence. And so the last 10 years has been kind of a series of things that I've been working on that were all a function of a broader strategy towards creating some new technologies to add to the way the web works that would then support new business models that would allow for media companies to actually have business models that were more native to the decentralized architecture of the web. It was really, I think my focus was really on realizing that 30 years ago when Tim Berners-Lee launched the web, he launched a decentralized architecture as a network that was designed to propagate information across the nodes. It wasn't actually designed to aggregate audience to individual domains. It was supposed to do the opposite of that. And but for the last 20 years, media companies have been employing business models that require you aggregate audience to particular domains. And so in doing so, they've been trying to impose a traditional media business model on a medium where they're literally trying to swim against the natural current of the medium. And it wasn't just because they didn't understand how the web worked. It was because we didn't have the technologies to actually support media business models that were distributed in nature and by virtue of that more well-designed for the decentralized architecture of the medium. And so I was involved in launching an open source software project in 2014 and 2015 called the AMP project, which was the idea that, my idea for the AMP project was, let's just create a global web standard technology for content syndication so that ads, analytics, and paywalls can travel with content, be controlled by the originating publisher, but rendered on any domain. And so we launched that in 2015, and now it's about 30% of the web. And so that's been good. And then after that, I was at The Guardian. I had left Google and I was working at The Guardian to launch this project with a coalition of European media companies that had a lot of influence in the EU. And after that, after we launched that project, I started a company to just help publishers get onto this new AMP framework. It's like a little AMP converter technology. And just shy of our 2-year anniversary, we ended up selling that company to Google in 2017. And then I started Distributed Media Lab now as a content distribution platform that leverages AMPs as a syndication format now that they're ubiquitous. So like the first step was like, how do I get the whole world to rebuild their website in a new web framework? And luckily, Google was willing to play a leadership role in that. And now that the whole world has, now I can actually leverage that new reality to create new business models that are based on a distributed design for a decentralized network. And so that's what Distributed Media Lab does. So we work with hundreds of local news publishers and lots and lots of national and international news brands to distribute their content in a way that helps make more money for both the large publishers and the local publishers. And it's going pretty well. It's been a pretty crazy last couple of years.
So Jen, just so everybody in the audience that they may not be aware of, Dave, AMP stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages, correct?
Yeah. So when I was at Google as an employee, I always wanted Google to launch an open source software project to define a global standard for content syndication. And so I was writing all these memos, but I'm not an engineer. So at Google, that meant I had no reason to say anything about anything interesting within that company. And so the memos that I was writing, I was always referring to it as portable content units. But then when I left and I went to The Guardian, and Google was willing to now do this because we were as a coalition, we were going to be, helping them out in some ways as well. And then Dave Besbris, who was a VP of engineering at Google, was assigned to the task. And he's like, well, if we're going to create a new web development framework, why don't we just do it in a way that makes pages load a lot faster? Because it just stinks to wait 22 seconds for like the Modesto B to load on my mobile phone browser, because he's this guy from Modesto, and and he works for Google, so he just wants to look at it on a browser, right? Not in an app. And so we like, yeah, that works. And then let's change the name, because then we started to build it, and like a 22-second average page load for a local news publisher website would load in 700 milliseconds using our new framework. And so we're like, let's change it to Accelerated Mobile Pages. And I'm like, well, it wasn't really first about being a fast loading page. It was really first about being a syndication format. And secondly, it's not just about mobile, because it also works on desktop browsers. It works on any kind of browser. And but whatever, Google's paying for everything, so let's just call it accelerated mobile pages. And so it's been it's been a misnomer from the day one, and that's caused some marketing problems, as we've tried to roll out the standard.
Well, we just call them PCUs for this call. So we'll use the Dave Gehring portable content units.
I still think of AMP as like my baby, but PCUs is like, I want to bring the name back someday.
All right. So I mean, I think Dave, you've done a great job of kind of framing, some of both the challenges that you saw in this crazy thing called the internet, but also kind of what potentially some of the opportunities, and that's really kind of where DML sits. But I'd love to hear from Marcy and maybe first Marcy and then Chris a bit about, like, okay, you live in this information world from a governance standpoint. Do you see the same challenges? Are there other unique opportunities in how we distribute information? And I definitely, it's funny is that information can yield action. And are there tensions there that we need to be aware of? And what are some of the pitfalls and the risks and the deeper challenges? So maybe Marcy, you first.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you saw how vigorously I was nodding my head as Dave was speaking because he was singing my song. Absolutely, for the civic space, the decline of local news is a travesty. It is accelerating, and it contributes. We are seeing the ripple effects of people with lack of information, of in most cases nonpartisan localized information in local newspapers or on local television and radio stations that helps them feel connected to what's happening and to understand things not through a partisan national horse race lens. And it is impacting our politics, it's impacting the decisions that are being made, it's impacting our social structures, and it's really important. So I'm so glad that Dave's going to figure out how to fix the funding model for local news, because it's vital. I kid, but it's so important. And I actually, one of the things I always bring up when given the opportunity is that there are models for funding and supporting the civic version of a technology that I think big tech hasn't done yet. There have been a lot of isolated kind of philanthropic efforts by certain big tech companies to fund the name of myself grant here or the name of myself grant there, but not a scalable approach to this. And the best example I can think about is C-SPAN. So, in the 70s, the cable companies were about to get really hammered because they didn't have the same restrictions as the broadcast companies. And they came together and instituted essentially a voluntary tax that they continue to administer to this day. A fee on every cable bill goes to fund this civic good that is C-SPAN that we all still use. And I think that there's really a need and opportunity for there to be a tech version of that. One other thing I want to point out that inspires me so much is and David, I'm sure you're familiar with this, is a project that I think started in Chicago called City Bureau, or called Documenters from the City Bureau organization. It's almost like gig economy for covering your local public meetings. So they bring people in, they get trained to go and cover public meetings, and then they go and they watch the meeting and get paid. So it's almost like an Uber for a local reporter. That won't replace your investigative reporter who's digging into the budget and knows, who's been there and the, longevity of having real reporters on the ground. But I think looking at some innovative examples of ways to have scalable local coverage is essential. And I'm excited to watch AMP and see what comes next.
Marcy, maybe to scratch the surface a little more, there is I think some of what you're doing is policy advocacy on your own platform. But I know that you have friends and colleagues, some of whom we both know that are actually looking at issues. They're looking at everything from like how you can identify political issues at a local level, how you can identify a pothole at a local level. So,
right.
I mean, what is news? I mean, like, so do you have a lens, into kind of how is that? Is there an opportunity space there that provides a different level of information?
There's definitely opportunity. I think we're in like version 7 of the hype/idealism cycle of how tech is going to transform advocacy and public participation, and I think viewing this space with a lot more realism than there was in the past. And yes, there's some wonderful examples out there, as See Click Fix and others, of how you report your pothole, but there are also some really kind of complex issues that come up with those kinds of participatory platforms, and who has access and who feels empowered. One of the things, and I think, Bill, you may be thinking about this, that I mentioned to you that we're working on is we're building a new civic experience metric. So one of the challenges in the government space is you see a focus on the customer experience, which is in many cases a disempowering experience if you are just going to say, I pay my taxes, give me my thing, as opposed to feeling how much you as a citizen are also kind of on the board of directors of this company, not just a customer. So, looking to measure not just if, when you engage with government, you get the thing you were looking for, but do you know who you're engaging with? If you didn't have a good experience, do you know who to talk to about that? Do you understand if you're engaging with the local or the state or the federal side of government? So yes, there are lots of ways to open the door for participation. I think it's going to be important, though, for it to not just be kind of the outside lobbying information into the government, but working more closely with either representatives or agencies or other entities to make sure that the door is open for participation and that it's a two-way conversation.
Yeah, so I think we're really talking about a combination of companies almost that'll have to be in this iteration 7. Chris, I mean, what do you think are, from your vantage point, you're working on one of the seminal challenges, but you also, given that Dave's here building what he thinks is a new academic model, or not academic, advertising model, or, economic model. Do you see kind of this whole idea of serving up content, paid content, as being a thorny issue for your own business, but also something that is essential for propping up this whole media news or industry? And how do we do that?
I've been worried about the demise of local news for 15 years. It's been, and largely because I had a very unique view of it. I was on the advertiser side, and so I saw how we devalued print advertising as we got more knowledgeable about the effectiveness of advertising, and how the duopoly of Google and Facebook has really become the only option for most small local advertisers. And so when you have essentially the local news model was built on a combination of subscriptions and that brought timely news once a day, and frankly highly overvalued advertising, print advertising. Once people like me and my job, I had hundreds of people trying to figure out how to be more efficient in spending marketing dollars. We realized pretty quickly, once we did the deep data work, that why would we ever buy a print ad? Like, it just didn't make sense. And then I had hundreds of people with experience with major media brands talking the Des Moines Register. We could run circles around them. And so, but as a citizen, I recognize just how vital that was. And so I will just say, David, I am super happy to hear that AMP came from a noble place, because from where I was sitting, it felt like a data and money grab by Google. I'll just admit it. I had a very cynical view of it, because one of the reasons the Modesto B takes 22 seconds to load is they had an entire back-end data system that they were selling third-party data, which is problematic in and of itself, but it was a revenue stream that got cut off. But if they're getting paid fairly for that content, I feel much better. So thank you, David, for washing away a little bit of my cynicism. I appreciate it. But I think the other element that we haven't talked about that's really a threat to quality local nonpartisan journalism, which is critical, is that we're ignoring and haven't talked about the fact that every one of us is a reporter. When a natural disaster happens, we turn to Twitter for unfiltered views from people on the ground. George Floyd's murder is a prime example. That in a traditional media ecosystem, that would be a report from the Minneapolis police about how a man died with a medical condition in custody. But because there was a citizen journalist without an editor, without a filter, we saw what really happened. Critically important to society and democracy. The problem is there's no filter and there's no editor. And so the same thing that's empowering is also allows bad actors to do a lot of things. And so, with 70 million elements of CSAM flying around in things as innocuous as Twitter and Facebook groups, and it's everywhere because they're using the exact same tools we're all using. And so, that's where, I think I've had this interesting view of the internet where I think the first 10 years in like 90 to 2005 was, hey, this is real. And then it was from 2005 to now, 2015, it was, we're going to make a ton of money. And it was like, go, 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 nothing's wrong. And we're getting to, and I think you see this with any major media, it's about a 30-year cycle for society to figure out how to do it. Now we're coming into the reconciliation phase and trying to figure out how do we do this. And so, we founded CrewNom around one thing, and it's not just CSAM. That's the first thing. We have amazing technology that is kind of a giant leap forward in the detection of CSAM. But it's really about taking free speech and helping the platforms that are now facilitating our one-to-one journalism. It's a misnomer, but social media, but which is really a version of journalism. How do we protect readers from harmful speech, from online harms? So we're starting with the most egregious with CSAM, but that could eventually evolve to extremism. That could evolve to fake news. That could evolve to all these other things. And unfortunately, when you put, David, you mentioned how Google is engineer-led. When you put engineers in charge, they focus on what is possible, not what can be done, not what should be done, because they're engineers. They're like, oh, I can put this together and I can do it with this. And sometimes they don't think through the consequences. And we're now having a reckoning and having some of that happen. And now we're taking the, CrewNom, we're taking the engineers and we're focusing on the problem of what should be done versus what can be done. It's frankly more challenging than the ramp up. And I apparently am a glutton for punishment. I love challenges.
So you brought up, though, just kind of started to allude to the making distinctions between, information and disinformation, as well as identifying, what is, how do we know what citizen journalists to trust and how do we validate all that? So, Marcy, Dave, what are the tools we have available to address this?
Well, I think it's the concept of the citizen journalist is a really tricky one because when you have your phone and so you can record something that's happening on the street in front of you, you're not providing any context, you're not providing any analysis, you're not providing journalism, you're providing information or data. That information or data, historically has not been parsed into an appropriate journalism product, and now it's starting to really move in a different direction, which is inspiring in a lot of ways. But I think that I was always a little bit reluctant to refer to the person on the street with a camera as a citizen journalist, just because there wasn't actually any journalism going on. There was just data capturing. And then that when streamed on social media can lead to extraordinarily powerful and beautiful things, and also extraordinary and powerful harm. And so I think, and then I guess from my perspective, the social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook, they could have been taking much stronger action against disinformation in particular, but also hate speech in general. For a long time, if not for the political climate. And so the political climate was really forcing their hand to remain inactive toward doing what would not be hard to do to start to curtail hate speech in general and disinformation specifically. We can watch when a meme is created by, and published from an IP address from an office in St. Petersburg by the Internet Research Agency. We can watch it get discussed in on the usual suspect kind of dark web channels. We can watch it bounce to Twitter. We can watch bots originating from Russia having conversations about that meme that was created by a guy in St. Petersburg, falsely accusing a Democratic politician of something or another in like a pizza parlor. Then we can watch those bots loop in the show producers for Sean Hannity's show on Fox News and have the conversation. And then I can watch it show up in Sean Hannity's monologue within a week, like over and over and over again. I mean, this is not rocket science anymore. I mean, this is really not hard to identify disinformation and how it flows through social media channels all the way to cable news. And then I hear about it from my mother-in-law because she loves Sean Hannity. And I just pull my hair out. And then she sends me the email that she just got from, and I try and tell her, there's a guy in Russia who sent you this email because he knows you're going to forward it to everyone you know. And it's not true. And she's like, no, you're just totally influenced by the media. I mean, so it's this weird confluence of the political climate actually forcing the platforms to remain inactive towards addressing some of these issues. That is really, it's not a technical challenge. It's a societal or a cultural challenge. It's a political challenge before it's a technical challenge at scale.
Well, it's also, I will also say it's an economic challenge. The reason I put social media in the journalism space is that they're competing for the same dollars. Mm-hmm. It's that economic pool is feeding, and it's the exact same economic pressure that is causing Twitter not to shut off bots. They could identify bots tomorrow, but they would lose so much conversation and fill in the blank, which then leads to advertising. And the paradox is the more extreme the content, the more engagement it gets. So there's actually an economic benefit to keeping a lot of this kind of fringe content on social media, if you think about it algorithmically. And so, that's kind of the can and should, and those are that's the reckoning we're dealing with right now. So sorry to interrupt, but I think that obviously it's data versus journalism, but to the consumer, they're not often discerning that. And to the advertisers, it's all the same pool. And so when it looks like it and smells like it, but it's different, but the impact is the same, we need to deal with that as a society. And that's part of the issue.
Yeah,
Marcy,
the business model is driving it. Good.
Yeah, no, so I'm curious too. I mean, I think that you can layer in, and I'd love to hear, Marcy, I mean, like, given that we lived through January 6th, it's like definitely the most traumatizing of days to me. We talked about September 11th in the last panel. I put that right up there with September 11th. Mm-hmm. But and when we think about sectarianism and the threats to American democracy, global democracy, what are the answers?
Well, I don't know that I have the answers in a handy list.
Channel your inner Jefferson.
Thank you for not asking me that question.
All right. But can you please? I do think as David and Chris were talking about the technical side of this, which is of course a really big component. I think the point that was also raised, that is the non-tech side of this is also really important. Why are these seeds finding such fertile ground in a society that feels so disconnected, that doesn't trust the government, that doesn't trust each other, people who are feeling lonely during the pandemic, who didn't have there are ongoing 400 years of racial trauma in the country. There is a lot of issues that are not technical, but that are exacerbated by tech, and the technology makes it that much easier to find the fertile ground. I think, I am one of the articles that I forward to lots of folks many times a year is an article, a report called Attacks on Common Knowledge in a Democracy by Bruce Shire and Henry Farrell. that talks about how there needs to be shared common knowledge in a democracy. Who's in charge, how elections are run, why they're legitimate, how our Congress is structured, what the laws are, so that you can have disputed knowledge of, what is the right healthcare policy, what's the right tax policy. So usually the disagreements in a democracy and the arguments and the debates and ideally the things that people are writing about and arguing with each other about are in that disputed category. And where we saw the attacks over the past several years, many and most of them coming from outside, but exploiting internal divisions and weaknesses and vulnerabilities, much of that was on the common knowledge. And I don't say that civics education is the panacea, but there are lots of underlying fundamental trust, understanding, education, connection, places where we have to put focus in order to, so even to start to have a list of the things that can be addressed as a part of this big problem. Tech is a big part of it, and a lot of those things, local journalism, civic education, connecting people, helping them understand each other, building empathy, a lot of that can be assisted by tech too. But I do think it is a big, complex issue, and I like the point raised earlier that we're kind of at the 30-year mark of kind of starting to figure out how we operate in a healthy way with this new kind of information-focused society.
Do you think all that has to happen, Mark? You just kind of like to respond to that. I mean, one of the fears I have, and I apologize because I'm sharing workspace, so you can probably hear conversations happening in the background. Does all that have to happen virtually? Can it happen digitally as well? Or can it happen in person? And should we be using digital platforms to encourage more in-person interactions?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the first things we need to do once we're all vaccinated is rush out to libraries and discussions with each other and town meetings and places where we get to recognize, even though we're different, how much we have in common. I just wrote a piece with a woman named Holly Rusin-Gilman about this concept of civic infrastructure. Infrastructure is kind of a hot topic these days, but we were talking about civic infrastructure as not just the technology that you might write to a member of Congress with, or you might have access a government service with, but also the libraries, the schools, the places where people come together that are a part of our neighborhoods and so important for that connection and understanding. And yes, some of it, going to the streets to protest is an important part of civic engagement. I want it to be the case that is not the only way that one feels heard. And so that, in itself, virtual town hall meetings are great. Sometimes it's nice to look your member in the eye and tell them what you think.
Yeah, I want to put a plug in there too. As a trained city planner and transportation engineer, some of the problem here too is maybe how we've organized space in our cities too. That we necessarily don't have that physical civic square anymore. In Mexico, the Zocalo, or that space where you do find the physical space for assembly. And I'm wondering, Dave, is there a digital platform that then can create that physical space, or is there a role that news media play in that?
Before COVID, I was really excited about the burgeoning event business for local media. And it's not a big business. It's not an infinitely scalable kind of thing. But I thought it was a defensible and a unique thing that was unique to what the role that is played by local news. And so, I was seeing Texas Tribune really growing that as a aspect of their business, and a lot of other local news organizations were looking at Texas Tribune and trying to follow that same model. And the local news organization has a unique opportunity to get the people who are in power positions to come and sit on a stage so that they can ask some questions in front of a room full of people from the community. And then to sell sponsorships against it, as well as to sell tickets to it. And so there's a consumer revenue model, there's an advertising revenue model from a sponsorship perspective, while doing the work of a local journalism organization holding power accountable in a way that only they can. the challenge when you try and turn that activity into a digital, in some sort of digital manifestation, is that then you have this imperative to scale, and that imperative to scale inherently mutes the whole value of the exercise. And so I'm hoping that that comes back. I think it was probably going to play itself out to reach become a business model that was a nice add-on, but not necessarily like a core thing. In the meantime, I've watched a lot of local news organizations do really well in 2020 with their membership subscription models. And so instead of a hard paywall, let's just ask people to donate because they're members. And when I was at The Guardian, we launched the membership program back then, and it was really clear to us that consumers don't pay you for the content you wrote yesterday. They'll pay you for what they think you're going to write tomorrow. And that means they know who you are as an entity, as an organization, as an editorial voice, and they want to support that voice. And so they'll only pay you for what they think you're going to write tomorrow, but not what you wrote yesterday. And so understanding that balance is really where a lot of local news organizations are finding themselves increasingly able to understand, like, membership is a lot more useful than hard paywalls. But then also, like, the aspect of advertising that we're really focused in is content marketing. And the way it's working is we provide a collection of content from around the web using AMP, which is putting AMP URLs together in an embeddable AMP viewer experience. And then the local publisher actually goes and works with local businesses to create custom content that can be included in that consumer experience on their site. And this is another thing that local news organizations are in a unique position to do. And so Google and Facebook can't compete with this because it's an inherently analog activity, working with a local business to understand how that local business wants to be thought of by their local community, and then writing stuff to reflect those values. That's just something that local news organizations have the muscle memory to do, and it's an inherently unscalable thing. And so it's not something that Google or Facebook could even do, even if they wanted to. And it sells really well. Like, for these little collections that we're embedding on local news, they're selling them for $15 CPMs. And so, and it basically is like economically kind of, then they start to wonder, do we need that 78 cents that we're getting from Taboola? And so that's really the thought process and the decision that's being made by local news publishers when they're working with us, is like they can sell it themselves for $15 at like a 90% profit margin, because we're curating content from around the web that they didn't have to produce. They just have to go sell a sponsorship campaign. And so it's really like, what are the business models that local media are uniquely in a position to do? And then how do we turn those into, when we started working with one local publisher, they were doing about $2,500 a month in content marketing. And a year later, they were doing $70,000 a month and at 80% profit margin. And so it funds their core. That pays the journalists to actually go do local news journalism, holding power accountable, because we can put an auto section on their site. We can put an environmental section on their site. We can put, all this that they don't have to do any work to create, but they can monetize because of their unique relationship and engagements in their community.
So Chris and Marcy, we've talked a lot about disaggregating to local, but like these large behemoths ain't going away.
Right.
So how do we grapple with, and Chris, this is a little bit of like, thinking about your product, but also kind of, Marcy, when you flip what you're doing, like what is the future of these large platforms that are now perhaps even legally, because if you have an iPhone, we can't necessarily get that material, even like local data now based on security stuff. So what is the solution?
Here, I was so happy you asked Marcy the question, and now you just asked me to solve big tech.
Yeah. I was trying to be polite and like reframing it, so it didn't.
But to be honest, it's I think what we all. One of the things I always told people in the early days of digital marketing, because I'd have clients of mine come to me and go, tell me this magic of digital. I'm like, it's just humans on a computer. So you have to treat people like humans. And I think part of the issue is the way we as humans are wired. The digital world kind of hacks that a little bit. I think the study of behavioral science is really fascinating, economic behavioral science, because it kind of shows how things that have kept us alive for thousands of years are backfiring in the digital space. And because we're shifting from really an organization around geography, what's near you, to information, which is what's accessible to you. Now, and you even see that in kind of the big sort that people are talking about, where people are literally uprooting their lives and moving to different cities and towns and suburbs to be closer to people that are intellectually like them. And so that reorganization being powered by kind of connection is a human problem. And so it's not solely a fix for big tech. Obviously, they have a role in this, and part of that is, not only having a large focus on safety, like trust and safety, which is where we fall in, which is keeping their users safe, but also thinking about the impact of their algorithms. And it's hard because it's hard to determine what the impact of their algorithms are. But that's, I think, where the best and brightest minds are working right now. It's not just about, and I think you see it in how some of the best technology people are choosing jobs. Like, I don't know how many times I've heard, I don't want to just figure out how to make one more millicent on a page view. That isn't meaningful work to some of the best thinkers, and they're starting to really deal with bigger problems. And so I have faith that on the technical side we'll get better at it. But the broader issue is how humans behave, and I think we and this is not relative to either side of political leanings or anything. We have an empathy gap. And the way information is structured right now is exacerbating that. And I think it's, in the very specific world of CSAM, child sexual abuse materials, it actually leads to the damage of kids, the misfiring of human brains. Because if you're a guy sitting in his basement in Kansas and doesn't know anybody else that likes this stuff, but all of a sudden finds a community of 1,000 people around the globe, it normalizes the behavior. It normalizes what he does. And it actually radicalizes, quote unquote, to action in damaging another child. And so that's why it's so critical to break that cycle in this one element. But it's because you're affirmed by people like you around you. And so I've been advocating to anyone who can listen that we need to add serendipity to the web. One of the brilliant things about having a physical newspaper is you read articles you'd never read because you just run into it. There is nothing in my digital life. I've actually had to engineer into my digital life serendipity. I put people into my feed, not because I like celebrity news, but because I'm like, I have to understand why people care about celebrity news. I put different voices into my Twitter feed that I would not select because I need to hear that. I have Fox News on my Google News, not because I agree with it, but because I want to understand it. And but even I, who have been talking about this for 15 years, it's a challenge. It's hard to do. I have to be really purposeful about it. And so, we talk about civics education. I hope that we move more systemically in education away from a topic and more towards systems of thinking, and empathy is one of the big ones.
I think that's
and
going,
go
ahead.
Because, frankly, I go, oh, that person voted differently than me, they must be crazy. No, there's a real motivation behind that. And there's a real thing that matters to them. And when we can get past the policy thing or this or that and get down to the core of I'm scared of change. I'm not scared of change. And or whatever it is. I want a more authoritative government. I want a less authoritative government. These are fundamental questions. But when one party deals in untruth and the other party deals in minute policy, we're not talking empathetically about anybody, and that's I think part of the issue.
Chris, thanks for that. And I think that kind of definitely leads us to where I wanted to go. And so I'll which is really just kind of these lessons for leadership, lessons for our audience in terms of some of the things that they can carry away. And I think what I heard also was empathetic leadership. And I love the serendipity theme, but I want to, I kind of, as we bring this segment to a close, what I wanted to maybe do is flip that question to Dave and then Marcy about we have Chris just dropped a knowledge bomb on this audience. And I really, I was curious, having led multiple companies, Dave, and really Marcy leading in this civic tech, gov tech space, what are lessons you have for this audience? And then kind of building on what some of the I think the lessons that Chris started on, are there things that you would add for young leaders, for existing leaders in this space or other spaces? Dave, you?
In terms of maybe you could ask me that question in a different way. I'm not really sure.
What works for you in terms of leading your company in a conscious way with social values that matter?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, we're a digital platform. And so there's a lot of opportunities for us to have conversations about if we are successful and become an extraordinarily scaled digital platform, what kind of decisions do we make about who is allowed to use our platform and who is not allowed to use our platform? And I think that my natural inclination is to take advantage of every aspect of our current legal framework that gives me absolute power over my own platform, and not to my own personality kind of inclines me towards not having any concern about maintaining anyone's First Amendment rights on my platform. I feel like that's the government's job. If the government has some regulatory imposition on a private platform for the purpose of maintaining First Amendment rights, that's the government's job. But for me, I don't really see the need to have people using my platform that I don't like. And and so it's not a very nuanced policy, but I have the luxury of not needing to be very nuanced because we're just a startup. And so it'll get a lot more complicated when things get a lot bigger. But I also have the personality type that I know in my 20s, I was willing to die on every single hill. And there was never a political hill I wasn't willing to die on. And now in my 30s, I'm like, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. And then through my 40s, like, that was a really bad idea. And now, this year I get to turn 50 and I'm like, okay, I still love that person that I know I am in my core, but I need to think more deeply about these things than I did back in the day. But at the end of it, I mean, we're a private platform. If you're a private platform, it's the government's job to impose protections around constitutional rights, and it's not my job to do that. I think I sleep better at night if I just kick people off the platform that I don't like.
I loved your evolution as a manager, Dave. That was great. That's a good lesson for our audience. Marcy, do you have any thoughts on this and final thoughts on this?
Yeah, and actually I would second the lesson that David's talking about. I was telling a colleague earlier this morning that my mark of maturity is how small the universe is becoming of things that I think my opinion is required on. And that took a while. But I actually really appreciate David's point about the decisions that you make early on in kind of tech company lifespan, and the decisions that are easy when you're small and can fit the people in a room that are making the decisions and have the conversations about smaller issues. And we did the same at PopVox. A lot of folks thought we were really crazy early on when we decided not to build on the Facebook platform, when we decided that we weren't going to take advertising because there were a lot of incentives baked into the advertising model that, at least in our civic space, didn't make sense. It didn't mean that we didn't like the advertising model in other places, but for us as a civic company, it didn't make sense. But there weren't a lot of civic companies around 10 years ago. So there were very few peers to look to discuss why we were making decisions so differently than other quote unquote startups. And it took us a while to figure out that we weren't a quote unquote normal startup. It was a few traces up and down Sand Hill Road, but we finally got it. But I think it ties a lot into the question that was asked in the earlier panel, and I think the answer was follow the data, which I think is really important. But there are some questions, especially early on in a new kind of organization, where there is no data, and what you have to follow is your gut and is your kind of core beliefs about what is important and how the organization is going to run, and on the question of advice for others, whether working in the public sector or other places now, I do think if you're at the beginning of a career looking out, the important thing to know is that you are not going to know what the path looks like. And anybody who's trying to plot a direct line from A to B to C to D, miss that vegan power bar detour would be missing out. So I think there's so much, even in the public sector now, nobody is trained for what is coming in the public sector. The folks who studied government 10 years ago don't know about the technology that they need. The folks who study technology, are not having the same kind of understanding of the governance challenges. So breadth of focus and variety and experience and understanding that sometimes the twists in the road are just fine, I think would be my advice.
Thanks, Marcy. And I see Chris's affirmation, and we're out of time. So I want to thank the three of you for an exceptionally rich conversation. I actually feel like I've learned a lot, but I've also really enjoyed hearing you all talk with one another. So thank you for being here today. And look forward to catching up with you, hopefully in person sometime over the coming months. Get vaccinated, folks. So, I just, as our friends, Dave and Chris and Marcy step away, I just want to, echo these closing thoughts to wrap us up, that I really was inspired to hear empathy, leadership transition and being patient with that over time. Marcy in this panel talking about the importance of media and news, looking for that shared space of commonality where you can find that disputed space. And, our shared space can't be where us all sharing a Netflix experience. And I think that's a really interesting lesson for us to carry forward. And then if we take that to the first panel, I think some of that shared experience, we started to get into the aspect of human as well as environmental consciousness, and this how we need to value human beings that are part of our delivery ecosystem. And there's a lot of policy and media dialogue about that, but we also have to seek to really take care of the planet that we've been instructed, or we've been given. And we have to do that for generations to come. And George Monbiot wrote a book called Heat a while back. And one of the provocative things I took from the First Planet was we couldn't grapple with this idea of what George Monbiot called love miles. And I brought up this idea of what do we do when we get on a plane and all that jet fuel burns up, and we're doing it because we love somebody else. And so I bring that up to say that we didn't solve everything today, and the point of Innovate for Good is to bring up some of these issues in a conscious way where we acknowledge some of that. We take hold of what we know. We also take hold of what we don't know, and then we move forward to address some of those societal issues. And so with that, it's not only an encouragement, call to empathy and take care of yourself, take care of the people you love around you, to draw boundaries and achieve and move beyond those boundaries, but also to own that we don't know everything and that we still have a lot of challenges to solve from a system standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, from a human standpoint. So thank you for being here today. Thanks to all these panelists. Thanks to Pete Peterson for allowing us to honor him and for all the work he does in the city of Oakland. And we look forward to seeing you again on our campus or in our community.